Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be talking about the great glue test. This has been something that's been in the works for well over a year. It's been about a year and a half that I've been working on several different glues. If you don't know what I'm talking about April last year I put out the great glue test where I went through 32 different glues. And we went through a lot of the common wood glues, Titebond wood glues, a bunch of epoxies, a few of the CA glues and some of the other super glues. It was kind of interesting to see how those go, and I was actually rather surprised with how the super glues came out. And some of the other things like, ooh, don't use waterproof PVAs outside, because they're really not waterproof, they're just water resistant-ish. And I wanted to take this on, but I wanted to do some more international glues as well as some of the construction adhesives and some of the other things that people have been talking about and actually compare them against more standard glues that we might have here in the US. So this will be a fun time to go through another set of 32 glues. So in today's video I'm going to be talking through the 32 glues that we're going to be testing now, and then we're going to get into some of the results and talk through it. This is going to be a little longer video because there's a lot of things to go through in here. If you want to skip straight to the results and you don't want to see all the glues, I'll leave a timestamp somewhere around here. So with that being said, let's actually dive in. Now the first glue on my test, I actually want to test homemade Casein Glue. This is made from milk. It is an old recipe that a lot of people have used and it's said to be waterproof, but last time I let it sit out too long and it rotted. It's something you have to use when it's fresh. And so the rotten stuff didn't work at all. And so I made up a new set and I wanted to go through and see what is Casein Glue. It is a very kid-friendly, safe glue. It's made from milk, really easy, but how does it actually stack up against other glues? Next was probably the most requested one, which was the Weld plastic resin. This is one that I have never really used before, and so I really didn't have a whole lot of experience. I was very interested to see how this went. We did a lot of hide glues last time, and several people were asking, what about regular gelatin, you know, like Jello that you can buy in the store? It's a pretty simple thing, but can it work like hide glue does? Several of these glues were actually sent to me by Marcus. He is a friend of mine from overseas, and so he sent me some other hide glues. This is a German hide glue. So it's basically the exact same thing. It's hide glue. It's made similarly, but does one compare to the other? So we're actually going to be testing that. Knochenleim, or something like that. Also from Germany, there were a series of glues from a company called Ponal, P-O-N-A-L. So we're going to actually be testing these, and from what I've been told, these you can get just about anywhere in Europe, so it should be kind of interesting to see how well do they do up against the Titebond and some other things like that. For this one we have Ponal Classic, Ponal Fix and Fest, UHU Express, Ponal Walsterfest, the waterproof version, UHU Original, UHU Walsterfest. We have Binden P, this is B3D3, and it's also a Walsterfest version. And then we're also doing a Ponal Express as well. And the last one that came from Germany was Makel Special, so we'll see how this does. Then we do have a few others from Titebond. We have the Titebond Extend and Titebond Extend 2. How well do those actually stack up against regular old Titebond? And kind of like the Fix and Fest, we have the Titebond Quick and Thick. So it'll be very interesting to see how does Quick and Thick stack up. I had several luthiers contact me and say I need to try Titebond 50. Apparently this is something that luthiers like to use. It is a wood glue that works well for them. So we'll be trying out Titebond 50. It's a little bit harder to come by, and it's really interesting. It comes in this really simple label. So yeah, it should be fun. Last time I tried just basic Elmers glue, you know, the simple crafting stuff. How well does that stand up? Well, Elmers also makes a wood glue max, and I've been told this is pretty good stuff. So, we'll see. Elmers also makes one called Pro Bond Advanced. It's not exactly a wood glue, but we'll see how that one takes up. And then of course, when talking about PVA glues, I had to try the Gorilla wood glue. Last time we tried actual Gorilla Glue, but we want to actually try their version of wood glue. I had a bunch of people telling me I really needed to try several different liquid nails and construction adhesives, so we're going to be doing that. Number one, we have the Gorilla Glue construction adhesive. Rather than getting a whole tube, I actually was able to find a squeeze tube. So Gorilla Glue construction adhesive. The good old standby liquid nails heavy duty. This is kind of like the old standard construction adhesive. So how does liquid nails heavy duty stand up? And of course you can't do liquid nails heavy duty without doing extreme heavy duty. How does extreme heavy duty stand up? Is there really a difference between regular heavy duty and extreme heavy duty? That'll be interesting. And then in the Loctite brand, I want to try another one because it's easy to test the two. We're going to be doing Loctite PL200, Loctite PL375, and then we're also going to be trying Loctite PL 3 times Premium. Is there a difference between these three, or are all construction adhesives the same? Now this is an interesting one. I think it was probably a dozen people tell me I need to test E6000 because this is the bomb. This is the absolute best glue. It's a clear, transparent glue that leaves no line, kind of like a construction adhesive. So we're going to be testing E6000, seeing how well does that stack up. It's kind of nice that it's clear, it's a little rubbery and flexible, so then we'll see. Last time I tested a whole bunch of different epoxies, but one I didn't test was the standard DevCon epoxy. So this is the home epoxy that most people can get. How does this stack up against things like West System epoxy? Does a DevCon epoxy work well? And of course you can't talk about epoxy without talking about JB Weld. Yes, the original, as seen on TV, JB Weld. How well will this do? It's very good with metal parts and steel, but how well does it do in wood? That'll be fun. We did the Weld Bond plastic resin, but what about the Weld Bond, the original standard Weld Bond? Does that actually work well? It feels like a standard PVA, but how does it stand up for regular wood gluing? With all of the hide glues I've been doing, I wanted to try a fish glue. Maybe next time I'll be trying a bone glue or a brain glue, but fish glue would be an interesting one. How well does that actually stand up in comparison to hide glue? And is fish glue water resistant? Because fish? We'll find out. And then last up we have 4/4 wood glue from Brooklyn Tool and Craft. This is something that is fairly commonly used in big shops, and so they've been trying to find a way of selling it in small containers as opposed to 55-gallon drums. And I've had a lot of people tell me this is the absolute best because it is so much better than others. How well does it actually stand up? We will be finding that out, but 4/4 wood glue. Now before we actually dive into all the results on this, I want to tell you there are several things you can go and look at. Number one, you can go and look at the test we did last time with all those 32. This is going to be focusing on these 32, and then we'll be comparing these against what we did last time. As well as if you want to see the actual process of how we're testing this glue, I have an entire video where I go into the process and talk through it. And I know several people are going to be throwing up, ooh, you didn't think about this, ooh, you didn't. I did think about that. I've been working on this well over a year now, and people have been throwing ideas at me. We've been testing moisture temperatures, keeping everything the same, types of wood, sizes of wood, shapes of wood, how they're put together, the pressure that they're used. All of these have been taken into consideration so that we're doing an apples to apples test. Every one of these tests have been done exactly the same way in comparison from one to the other, as close as we can possibly make it. Every single glue has had 10 samples in each of the 4 orientations. We're doing long grain to long grain, we are doing end grain to long grain, we're doing exterior conditions, and we're doing gap filling. So each glue has 40 tests done on it. Over all 64 glues, that's over 2,500 tests that I've been doing in here, breaking off pieces of glue. And so we're actually trying to find out what is the glue strength, not what is the wood strength. And then if you want to take this a step farther, I have an entire video where I did a live testing where I'm actually showing the actual testing work and I'm going through. So if you want to see all those videos are down in the description below. I don't want to spend too much time on the actual methodology of the test because there's lots of other videos on that. If that's information you want to know, go over there and check it out. So with all that being said, let's actually head over to the computer and take a look at the sheets on there and see what were the actual outcomes of this glue test. Oh, for the fun part, let's actually come over here and look at this sheet. Now, before we actually dive into the numbers, I'm going to talk through how to read this sheet because it gets really confusing for some people. So let's start by moving over here to the side and see a little bit about this. What are these colors? That's the big question I get first. The test was set up to stress the glue, so I wanted to make that break on the glue line, and all the force is put directly into that glue line. So most of the time I was able to make the glue break, even though in natural conditions the wood would have broken long earlier. But in some cases the wood did break a little bit or a lot. If it is yellow, that means that there was at least 25% of the wood left onto the block. So at least 1/4 of the surface was still covered with wood that broke off. Orange was 50%, red is 75%, and then bright red, which dark red, which there are only a few of, there was a full 100%. So you'd see that full rectangle block still attached to it. And so what I did with that is I kind of estimated that how much more pressure would it have taken to break that. And so we put my estimation in here by how much wood was left on there. And that goes into the adjusted average, which we'll be talking about that here in a moment. The next thing I need to mention is why there are 2 columns in every test, 2 columns in the average, 2 columns in the minimum, and so on. The first of the 2 columns is raw data. That is the actual reading on the scale. Now, my blocks were 1 inch by 3/4 inch, so it means it's not a full square inch. So all of my readings were on 1 inch by 3/4 inch. Whereas I can multiply it up to get me the actual PSI, the pounds per square inch. So these 2 numbers are basically the exact same. It's just one is bigger so that it makes it easier to understand. This particular one took 223 PSI, although it was 168 pounds per 3/4 inch. So calling things a 3/4 inch was a little bit confusing, but I still wanted that raw data to be in here so you can see the difference between what the number on the scale was and the PSI. Next, on every one of these tests, we then figure out what is the average. So out of all 10 of the tests, the average number is right here. The lowest number, in other words, the lowest pressure that was needed to break the block, and then we have the highest number, the maximum pressure that was required to take the block. The adjusted average is taking this average number and then me kind of guessing at how much more pressure it's going to take to actually break it with the broken wood. So you can see over here in the breakage estimate that any of these that I had color over here, I added some more to the adjusted average to kind of give it an idea if that would make any difference. In all of the numbers and everything, I'm basically throwing this out the window. It's there more or less for people to look at if they want to, but I'm going by the average numbers over here as those are a little bit more accurate and standard. The last column we have is standard deviation. Basically, the smaller the number here, the more accurate, the more I can trust all of these numbers. If it's something small like 16, then it means it's relatively accurate in comparison to everything else. If it's a really big number like down here at 100, ouch, that means I probably should do more testing on it. But a lot of times you'll see these big numbers where there's been a lot of breakage, so there'll be a larger range that it's dealing with, so it doesn't really, those numbers aren't 100% accurate. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of how much we can actually trust the results of any particular given number. Into the main body of the sheet, we can come down here and we can see all of the glues on the side, all 64 different glues. Whew, that is a pile. And then we come across, and each of these columns, A, B, C, D, those are each of the individual tests. So with Ponal Express here, we did test A, it broke at 25%. Test B, it broke with 75% of the wood still left. And then C was a clean break, D was a clean break, E, there was 25% of the wood left on there. So you can kind of get an idea of each individual test series and what all came out of it. And again, you can come over here and see the average, the minimum, the maximum, the adjusted average, the breakage, and how much we can trust those numbers, 38. So we have all of these blocks for, this is all long grain to long grain. So this was the long grain to long grain test and nothing else. We come down here and we have the long grain to end grain. That was just this, and you can see there's a lot less numbers on here because end grain, it's much easier to break on the glue itself. Then we come down a little farther and we will have gap filling. And you're going to see some more colors in here because with gap filling, you are basically doing long grain to long grain. And then we can come down here a little bit lower and have exterior conditions. So this is tested in a wet condition. Now all of the exterior conditions they have gone through 3 freeze-thaw cycles. They were outside for a week. Actually, it was a little over a week. And they were tested in a wet condition. So it is the worst possible conditions the wood could be tested on. So that's why you're going to see a lot of zeros. 0 means that glue did not even make it to the test frame. It fell off before it could get there. So it took no pressure at all to break it off. So this sheet is all of the raw data, and let me tell you, there is a lot of raw data to go through, and this really doesn't do justice to what everything is. So we've broken down here in the bottom to several other sheets you can go through, and they're set up by the different tests. First, let's do long grain to long grain. This will bring us over here, and these are all organized by their average PSI. So the strongest glue is at the top, and the weakest glue is at the bottom. And then we also have this graph over here so we can actually see all of them in comparison as they come across. To read this graph, you have the line, which is the hardest one to break, in other words, the highest pressure it took to break it, and the lowest pressure it took to break it, and a line in between that. And then this arrow, this little line in the middle, that is the average pressure that it needed to take it. So these are all set up by their average, but you can come up to like this Cascamite. This one had a very broad range, so it's not a great test. It could be that its actual average strength is higher or lower, but the average we have from the 10 tests put it right here. So let's actually talk about some of these tests. Number one, Elmers Wood Glue Max. That was the best long grain to long grain on average. It was phenomenal. A really, really high number here with 581 PSI on average to break it. Very, very strong wood glue. So yes, then we had the Loctite Premium. I'm rather impressed with that. Then number three, cheap super glue. That was actually from the last test series we did. This was the dollar store super glue. It held up phenomenally well in comparison. Then we have the UHU Washtefest B3D3. That was really strong. And so you can kind of come down here and get an idea of the top strengths. But does this mean that these are the glues you should use right here and these glues down here you should never use? No. What I want to do is come down here and show you basically the line I draw at. If a glue has under 200 PSI, that means I really don't want to use it in standard wood glue. Anything over 200 PSI, the wood is going to break long before the glue does. So if a glue has greater than 200 PSI, that means in most cases, it is stronger than the wood itself. So if a glue is above 200 PSI, it is a solid wood glue that I would trust. If it's below 200 PSI, then I may use it if I want to have a weak joint. And there are a few applications where you want the glue to break rather than the wood. But in most cases, things lower than that, I'm not going to mess with. Things like Fix-All Super Glue, Liquid Nails Heavy Duty, Titebond Original, that one really surprised me. It just did not perform well. The thin super glues were down here. Casein Glue, both tests with Casein Glue. Barge, contact cements, those are all down here. I generally don't trust those. The big surprises for me were things like Weld Bond plastic resin. That held up really well. Almost all the PVAs are up here. The 4/4 is up here. Elmers Wood Glue Max. Wow. Yeah, I've been really, really impressed with most of these up here. Next, we can move on to long grain to end grain. And you start to see some degradation on this because end grain just isn't as easy to connect with. And so we can see there's quite a few more down here below the 200 PSI rating. Liquid Nails Heavy Duty, again, not really good. Most of the hide glues end up being right around that 200 to 150 PSI. But then we can come up here and look at the good ones. Weld Bond Plastic Resin. Wow. It was number one for end grain and by a considerable margin. Now it had a very large range here, so 81 standard deviation. It's not a great test, so it could be lower, it could be higher, but the average from the 10 I got was way up there. We have several of the PVAs, the Gorilla Wood Glue, the UHU, Mickel Special, the Ponals. There are several of them up here. So actually, a PVA is a good, decent glue for long grain to end grain. The JB Weld, though, that was impressive, and JB Weld did decently in long grain to long grain. So yeah, I was kind of surprised by some of those. Now let's go down to gap filling, and we're going to see even more torture here. Now it is a long grain to long grain situation, so you do see some things like that, but some of the surprising ones, JB Weld right at the top. A good gap filling. Actually, JB Weld had the highest break of anything else. 789 PSI it took to break that. That is phenomenal. The actual glue itself is really solid, and I was impressed by that. Fish glue also was way up there for a gap filling. That kind of surprised me, but once you think about it, it's pretty good. Then we have the quick and thick. We have Elmer's wood glue, the Fix and Fest, those thick, heavy glues that will fill the gap. So if you have some gap filling, I would think about quick and thick. I would think about the Fix and Fest. Things that don't do well are your thin super glues, your epoxies. Any epoxy that doesn't have an aggregate in there, such as glass beads or something of that nature, it doesn't hold up well because it just shatters as opposed to holding onto the wood. Hide glues tend to be right around the middle of the gap filling, so it was kind of surprising. Then we can go over here and see the real slaughter, exterior conditions, and you can see how the numbers just plummet. There are very few things that stay above that 200 PSI marking. As you can see here, there's only a couple glues that are actually over 200 PSI. One of them, And number 1 again, Weld Bond plastic resin. Wow, I am really surprised by that. Some of the other exterior glues, 2P10 gel, 2P10 thick, 2P10 thick, West System epoxy, 2P10 gel, super glue, Gorilla Glue. This is the foaming Gorilla Glue. These are all up here at the top, which really surprised me. Super glue, epoxy, and plastic resin. Those are the glues you want to use outside. And I think plastic resin is going to now be my go-to glue outside. As to don't use, pretty much everything else. Any PVA, any Titebond, any of the Ponals, any of the high glues, they just melt in. You can see all of these down here. From here on down, not a single block from any of these even made it to the test frame. I mean, we can come up here for Titebond 3, which is supposed to be the exterior wood glue, and it only had 16 psi. There were several Titebond 3 blocks that did not even make it to the test frame. So Titebond 3 glue, don't use it outside. It is not a good all-weather weather glue. Yeah, some really surprising information in here. So there's a couple other down here. We have one that's overall, and this kind of takes all of the numbers into consideration: long grain, in grain, gap filling, exterior, and then averages all those out, and you can see them out here on the chart. And this gets kind of surprising. You can see the purple dot here is the overall average. And number 1, the overall average by a considerable margin, because you have all these here, and this one just goes poop way up there, is Weld Bond plastic resin. Wow, it's standing up there. Elmers Wood Glue Max, pretty darn good. I wouldn't use it outside, but it holds up incredibly well. So you can see how all of these compare. Anything over this 200 mark is a relatively good, solid wood glue. So this will be something to look through and just see, does your glue stack up to it? Now I wanted to see what all of this was without the exterior, because you can see all these green dots down here are the exterior conditions. So if we take out the exterior conditions, then you can see the numbers arrange a little bit differently here. And there's a lot more above the 200 mark on average. So they're pretty straightforward. But again, you still have Elmer's Wood Glue Max, Fish Glue. Weld Bound plastic resin is down a little bit more. It was brought up higher because of its exterior conditions, but still it's in the top 4. So really, really good glues. And JB Weld, if you're not outside, JB Weld does pretty well. JB Weld fell apart outside. I had several blocks that didn't even make it to the test stand. So some surprising information in there. The last tab here, I just wanted to actually compare straight up hide glues. And so we have the Fish Glue, which was our strongest of the natural glues. The German hide glue that we had sent over here, my homemade hide glue. And then we can go down into Old Brown and Titebond. Those are the ready to squeeze out. And then we have the preset glues that are set up with strength. And supposedly the 315 is supposed to be really high strength. I found that you can make most glues stronger. But 192 is supposed to be a weak glue. It's supposed to be something that will break before the joint does. So that's why it's down there a little ways. But some interesting things in here. And especially number 35 here, gelatin. This is just the straight gelatin you can get from the store put into here. Surprising numbers on that. So there is a ton of data in here, and I am really looking forward to digging into this. There's just so much more that there will be other things that I see, and I'd love to see what you actually find through this. Dig through this information. It's all down in the links below. So there you have it. Wow, you've stuck with me for a long video. Thank you for that. This has been really surprising to me, and I think plastic resin is something that I'm going to start working into my flow. I was really, really impressed with this, so we'll be doing that. Those people who've been saying construction adhesive is the thing to use, no, I'm not going to use construction. I mean, this extreme heavy duty, maybe, but there are so many better things that don't leave such a thick glue line. I'd much rather use something that I can trust, and it's designed for wood. So yeah, there have been a lot of other interesting things, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you see in this that was very interesting to you? Is there something you want me to test in the future? I am going to be doing several other tests. I want to be doing a long-term test, so we're going to be putting some boards out in the garage and letting them be to the expansion and contraction and test them over the years and see how that comes out. I'm also thinking about doing one on an open open grain wood like oak, and also picking out a few other things. So there will be more tests in the future, and it will be very interesting to see how those come out. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas. Where did you think I went wrong? Where do you think I did well? Let me know those down below. And if you want to settle any bets, go ahead and share this video with your friends and prove to them, yeah, I was right. This is the best glue to use. Had quite a few people do that over the years. So thanks for watching. This was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to having more glue tests in the future. I think that'll about do it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day. You want to talk about a sticky situation? Okay, now where do I put all these? The first step in getting over an addiction is admitting you have a problem. I, James Wright, am addicted to glue.